Hey there, pirates. Welcome aboard the Anime No Mi channel. Have you ever thought about what would have happened if Shanks hadn't arrived in time to save Luffy? Just thinking about it sends a chill down your spine, doesn't it? I hope for your support to help our crew win, and to do so, you just need to click the thumbs up button, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. By doing this, you will win an incredible devil fruit, so just comment which fruit you want. That simple moment in Chapter 1 not only shapes the relationship between Shanks and Luffy, but also sets the boy on an irreversible path to becoming the Pirate King. And of course, the price of that journey was Shanks' left arm. Literally, a trade between Luffy's life and the loss of a part of himself. But what if Shanks hadn't been fast enough? What would have happened to Luffy, to the pirates, and even to the very course of the One Piece story? This is the kind of question that opens a portal to a sea of possibilities and perhaps a much darker future than we imagine. Without Shanks to save the day, it's hard to believe that little Luffy would have made it out alive without becoming a tasty snack for the Sea King. Let's be honest, the boy, as stubborn and brave as he was, had no chance against a monster that size, unless another hero, like Garp, had shown up in time, which would also change the entire dynamic of his future. Just imagine Garp, that tough military grandfather, picking Luffy up in his arms like a sack of potatoes, rescuing him from a cruel fate, and perhaps building a very different relationship between the two. But even with Garp saving the boy, there's a good chance Luffy would never have become the pirate we know. How could he have promised to return the Straw Hat to Shanks if it weren't for that tragedy? The very reason that motivates him to move forward, the strength that drives him to build his crew and believe in the impossible, comes from that moment. Without it, where would he find the fuel for his dream? Now, imagine a scenario where, after the tragedy, Luffy simply wasn't saved. The Sea King would have made a quick meal of the boy, and Shanks, upon discovering it, could have drowned in guilt and regret. Even the youthful, carefree Shanks from the beginning could have turned into a darker pirate, marked by this failure. Instead of a charismatic, friendly leader, he might have become a more introspective figure, focused on revenge. Maybe he would try to hunt down the Sea King to avenge Luffy's death, or perhaps the red-haired crew would have started a new mission, hunting giant sea monsters to ensure no one else would face such a fate. But that would definitely change his relationship with piracy and life on the sea. Maybe he would stop being the friendly pirate and become one of the most feared and unpredictable leaders on the seas, leading his crew with much more aggressive and calculating strength. Now, a crucial point. Luffy's absence would change everything. Chapter 1 makes it clear that Luffy is more than just a boy with a crazy dream and a devil fruit. He's a unifying force, a soul that inspires even the most unlikely people to join his cause. Without him, the world of One Piece would be, well, a much lonelier and more fragmented place. Zoro might have never been found in Shellstown, and without the swordsman, the crew would never have formed as we know it. Imagine a world where Zoro was wandering alone, trying to find himself, without that chance encounter with Luffy that led him to embrace friendship and the Straw Hat Pirates' cause. And without Zoro, it's likely that Nami, Sanji, Chopper, and the rest of the crew would never have joined. What would have happened to Luffy, to his journey, without the unconditional support of his Nakama? Or any of these characters without Luffy's vibrant leadership? The hole in their hearts would be immense, and it's easy to imagine a world where these characters' stories would have been lost in the vastness of the sea, without a clear purpose. And what about Ace and Sabo? The impact of Luffy on their lives is also huge. If Luffy hadn't been there, accepting Ace as his brother and motivating Sabo to join the revolution, their stories would likely have taken very different paths. Ace might have sunk even deeper into the burden of being Gol D. Rogers' son, and without Luffy's friendship, perhaps he wouldn't have felt so isolated. And Sabo? What would have become of him without that emotional bond with Luffy, which inspired him to fight for freedom and justice? Their friendship is so fundamental that without it, the very foundations of several factions could have crumbled. Maybe Sabo would never have gotten involved in the revolution, and Ace might have never found a greater purpose for his life, which would have directly affected the course of the Great War. Finally, if Luffy hadn't been born to challenge fate, and if the pirate era had continued without his touch of madness and hope, it would have been a much darker scenario. Without Luffy to oppose figures like Blackbeard, the path to a new pirate era would have been paved with ambition, cruelty, and the lack of a strong ideal to follow. In Chapter 1000, Luffy is clearly one of Roger's heirs, a catalyst for a revolution on the seas. But without him, Blackbeard might have become even more powerful without a worthy resistance to stop his plans. The new era would have been dominated by pirates like him, manipulative, heartless, and without dreams of freedom. It would be a world where friendship and the ideal of a freer world would give way to a cycle of destruction and domination. And back to Shanks, he probably would have kept the Straw Hat as a constant reminder of the promise he couldn't fulfill. The hat, now a symbol of Luffy's unfulfilled dream, would be his cross to bear, and perhaps he would have become an even more distant figure absorbed in the task of protecting Roger's legacy and doing whatever it took to prevent more children like Luffy from perishing without fulfilling their destinies. The burden of being the last pirate might have made him a sadder, more solitary figure, but also immensely more determined to do whatever was necessary to ensure Roger's legacy was not forgotten. But of course, this doesn't mean the story would have ended there. Without Luffy, other figures could have risen to take his place, perhaps in a more unexpected way, creating new heroes or anti-heroes who would have given us other ways to explore the themes of freedom, friendship, and courage. Who knows, maybe even a new protagonist, someone completely different, would have emerged from somewhere in the world to face the same forces that Luffy challenged. Luffy's absence wouldn't mean the end of dreams, but a radical transformation of what we know as One Piece. What we do know is that without Luffy's straw hat, the world of One Piece would be a very different place. Colder, more calculating, and perhaps a little more hopeless. After all, we have the villains! Imagine what would have happened with each of them. If Luffy had never escaped the grasp of the Sea King, the impact of his absence would not only be limited to the lack of his presence as the protagonist. No, it would be a catastrophe of proportions that would ripple throughout the world of One Piece, disrupting not only the hopes and dreams of heroes, but also the plans of every villain he defeated. Each of these antagonists Luffy faced would have followed a very different path, perhaps more victorious, but certainly darker. The world we know, with its victories and accomplishments, would have been replaced by a scenario where tyranny, cruelty, and oppression would prevail without significant resistance. Let's begin with Buggy, the pirate who started as a joke, but without Luffy to humiliate him, could have become much more than a clown. In Chapter 9, Buggy is introduced as a pirate trying to dominate Orange Town, but he is defeated by Luffy in an epic and ridiculously funny battle. Without this confrontation, Buggy would likely have consolidated his power, accumulating wealth and expanding his influence. He already showed a certain level of ambition, and without Luffy's intervention, his rise as a feared figure on the seas might have been inevitable. Perhaps he would have become more than just a pirate, but a true pirate empire, a clown star, no longer ridiculed, but the terror of the seas. Moving on to Kuro, the villain who planned to take the fortune of the Kaya family in Syrup Village in Chapter 23. Without Luffy to thwart his plans, Kuro would likely have achieved his goals in a cruel and unobstructed manner. Kaya's village would have been taken, plunged into a regime of fear, where he would have established himself as a ruthless ruler. And the worst part, Usopp, our beloved liar with a heart of gold, might never have left his hometown, never becoming the brave warrior we know. Without Luffy's push, Usopp would have continued to live in the shadow of his own fear and lies, never taking the leap necessary to become a true hero. And who could forget Don Krieg? In Chapter 44, the great mercenary pirate arrives at the Baratie with his massive fleet and insatiable hunger for power. If Luffy hadn't stepped in as the defender of the restaurant, Krieg would have possibly conquered the Baratie, using it as a strategic point to further strengthen his fleet. In East Blue, without Luffy to stop his plans, Krieg's power could have spread like an oil stain, dominating the sea with no opposition. He might have become one of the most feared pirates in the region, with an enormous fleet and no resistance of equal measure. East Blue would have become a war zone, with pirates ruling everything and everyone, with no idealist like Luffy to challenge this status quo. Case of Arlong is one of the most devastating. Without Luffy to defeat him and free Nami from her psychological and physical captivity, Arlong would have continued to dominate Kokoyasi village, exploiting Nami's pain and turning her into a financial slave. The pressure on Nami would have been unbearable, and I can't imagine how she would have kept her sanity. She might have been forced to live a life of lies and despair, never finding the strength to move forward and become the brilliant navigator we all love. And without Arlong's downfall, it's possible that he would have expanded his pirate empire even further, subjugating other villages and spreading his terror across East Blue. The prospect of freedom that Nami found with Luffy would never have emerged, and the sea could have remained in a state of complete despair under his tyranny. And what about Crocodile, that cunning and relentless villain who almost took control of Alabasta in Chapter 155? Without Luffy's intervention, Crocodile would have taken total control of the country, and Vivi's revolution could have been suffocated before it even began. Without Luffy, Vivi might have never found allies as powerful as the Straw Hats. Robin herself might have remained Crocodile's subordinate, serving his whims and frustrating any possibility of joining a larger cause. The fate of Alabasta would undoubtedly have been tragic, with the people living under an even more brutal and hopeless regime. In Skypiea, where the self-proclaimed God Enel ruled with an iron fist, Luffy's absence would have allowed him to expand his empire. In Chapter 254, we see Enel as an almost omnipotent being, capable of controlling the skies with his lightning powers. Without Luffy to interrupt his plans, Enel would have extended his domain beyond the clouds, conquering more territories, subjugating more lives, and perhaps even achieving his dream of traveling to fairy Verth. His desire for destruction could have been realized, and the world below the clouds would have remained crushed under his oppression. Doflamingo, the master manipulator, is another case that would have drastically changed. In Chapter 234, Doflamingo establishes his brutality in Dressrosa, and without Luffy's interference, he would have further consolidated his power. He would not only have continued to control the country, but perhaps he would have expanded his dirty dealings in the underworld, becoming one of the greatest criminals of the New World. Without Luffy, figures like Law, who allied with the Straw Hat, would never have found the strength to challenge Doflamingo and seek revenge for everything he did. The balance between the great powers in the New World would have tilted even more toward the side of crime, without Luffy's challenge to contain this monstrous rise. And of course, Kaido. Without Luffy and the Straw Hats to oppose his plans for destruction in Wano, Chapter 795, Kaido would have continued to dictate the fate of the country with an iron fist, crushing any attempt at resistance. The people of Wano would have remained under his tyranny, and Momonosuke and the Red Scabbards might have never gathered the strength to resist Kaido and his plans. The revolution that finally gave the people of Wano a chance to fight for their freedom might never have occurred, and without a significant rebellion, Kaido would have accelerated his plans to create the greatest war the world has ever seen, bringing unpredictable consequences to the balance of the seas and perhaps even the future of One Piece as a whole. Many things would change, and what do you think about that? Comment. That was today's content. We hope you liked it and want to share your opinion on the subject. Don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and stay amazing.